Singing Dutchman Productions.
Hello and welcome to Doug's Front Porch, a podcast where I get to sit down with friends, old and new, and have honest conversations. Today, I welcome a newer acquaintance onto the front porch, Katy Bodenhorn Barnes, and it's so great for you to be with us here, Katy. Thanks for joining me on the front porch.
Thanks so much, Doug. This is going to be so fun. I'm
I'm
excited.
looking forward to it too. And we can talk a little bit here how we got to know each other. But first, I like to start every episode kind of the same way. If you could tell my audience a little bit about young Katy. Where were you born? Where'd you grow up? What was your childhood like? Do you have brothers and sisters? What kind of things were you interested in? Let's set the foundation of who Katy is.
Oh man, okay. That's a good place to start, I guess. So I was raised in a little town in North Texas for most of my life. I am the second of five children. My parents divorced when I was young, but I still had a fairly, close-knit family. I was a very, very shy bookworm. That is going to be relevant, I'm sure, to a lot of the things that we talk about. Um, and I was a super band geek that was also a side history buff, and the history buff side won out ultimately in school and with my career.
So from one band geek to another, what instruments did you play?
French horn and trumpet.
Oh my goodness. And
High
you
brass.
yeah, that's right. And you marched, I'm sure, right? Marching
Yep,
band. That's wonderful.
absolutely.
Yeah, I marched in marching band too. I was the drum major my senior year.
Hey,
So
me too.
yay, there we go. I started out on saxophone, and then somewhere in high school, my band director was like, "Hey, man, we need some low brass players. Would you consider trying to learn the euphonium?" And I thought, well, I'll give it a shot, and I picked it up, and I did treble clef euphonium. Then my senior year, I think, so went from woodwinds to brass. I guess I eventually found the right instrument family, right, as you would say, you brass
Wait, so
players.
were you alto or tenor sax?
I started out as in elementary school as alto sax, and then
Okay.
like going through one year I was playing tenor, and then one year I was playing bari sax, and yeah, it was whatever they kind of needed. I kind of like would move to, but we had a really strong band program, and it was a huge part of who I was as a kid, and still today. I mean, instilling a love of music and all that stuff. But man,
Definitely.
whenever it's like one of those things, it's that small club you run into someone that's a band geek, and you're like, band, yay.
You're right. That what you said about it being formative, it's really hard to explain to people. If you were a band geek, you know what it was about, and it's kind of hard to explain
Yeah,
if
because
not.
it was so much more than just playing an instrument. At least it was in my high. I'm sure it was in your school setting too. It wasn't the playing the instrument part was probably the out of all the things that it brought and formed for me, that was probably on the lowest end of the scale. It was the
Hmm.
friendships. And I mean, my band friends are still my closest friends from elementary school on. The kids that we were all in band
Hmm.
together, we all were in choir together. Those are still the people that I still have the strongest ties with by far, by far. Oh, I didn't know that about you. So that's a great thing. That's a
Yep.
great thing to learn. So you grew up in North Texas, but eventually you made your way to Utah. Let's talk
Mhm.
about that journey from high school on to college.
So I decided I wanted to get out of my small town. So I went to another slightly bigger small town out west in Utah. And I actually started out as a music major out there. Um, Still connecting the band dots here, but eventually I decided to do something else, and the college scene kind of blew open wide everything that's possible and all the different topics that are out there, all the different paths you could go, and so that kind of took me a little while. Anyway, um, so I ended up majoring in family history and genealogy, which is what I do now. And I had no intention of staying in Utah. But after 5 years of college, the things happened that usually happen, which is that I got a job there. I met somebody and just kind of ended up being there for 13 years until I was kind of ready to get on the road and get out of there too.
So let's rewind a little bit because I would imagine there's people listening to this show that had no idea that what you just talked about was an actual major that you could study in college. So you went in as a music major, but then
Mhm.
somehow, well, how did you come across this idea that there was family? What's it actually called? I don't want to say the wrong term. What was your degree in?
Family history and genealogy.
Okay.
Mhm.
So how did you come across that as an opportunity as a major?
being a history buff kind of growing up, I just really liked it anyway. My extended family was not super close, and so I had that kind of natural curiosity about where my people came from and who we were. And I discovered once I got to college that I could take a class in that. I happened to go to the only university, I think in the world, but at least the United States, that offers a bachelor's degree in genealogy, which is Brigham Young University. And so once I found out I could do that, I started doing my homework. And when you start doing homework and find that you want to do it because it's fun, you kind of don't really have a choice. That's what you're going to be doing for the rest of forever.
Okay, this might seem as like a dumb question to you, but I mean it's an honest question. What do you study in order to become a genealogist?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I like about it is that it is it's multifaceted. So I took a lot of history classes, obviously. But I remember I had a paleography class that was all about old handwriting.
Oh,
I took
we
one
gotta
in,
stop. We gotta stop. We
okay.
gotta stop because this is great. So, my gosh. So I'm familiar with that doing the work that I do with Pennsylvania Dutch stuff and looking at old documents from the 1800s and 1700s
Mhm.
and the different handwriting that's out there. Can we talk about that just a little bit from your perspective? What was
Yeah,
that? It's like learning another language, to be honest, sometimes, right?
it is. And I actually took two of the classes, and one of them was in another language. So I did a paleography class in English, and I did one that covered Spanish and some of the other Romance languages, but mostly Spanish. So, but yes, there are different handwriting styles throughout the centuries, and I mean, the word choice is going to be different too.
Yeah.
And then I know with the Spanish documents, you get into these situations where the Spanish priests and these Catholic records decide to abbreviate everything. So I don't know if they do that in the Pennsylvania Dutch and German documents too, but
Yeah, from time to time. And also there was non-conformed spelling because not everybody was educated
yep.
and yeah, all those things you're running into. So you studied, okay, handwriting and history. What other things did you did you have to dig into in order to get that degree?
I took a class that was called The Family and the Law in American
Ooh.
History. So there was, this element of when you're doing genealogy, you're going to be covering a lot of different parts of history in different countries. And so you can't really do that well without knowing what the laws were and what the customs were of those days versus now, and how that would affect how your ancestors lived and the decisions that they made. So there was a little bit of the law going on. I took some elective sociology courses, anthropology. Um, I almost minored in geography, but decided to piece out of that and just
Peace.
graduate. So, but all of it was relevant.
Yeah, right. It's such a I don't think people realize the multifacetedness of that background. And we're going to talk a lot more about this, the genealogy and your role as a genealogist and all that. But I mean, it's more than just being able to look at old records and come up with names and birth dates and death dates, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, in
It's a
fact,
lot more than that.
I never even thought about the connection of knowing family law. When you were talking about it, it's like, oh, well, that makes sense. But I'd never really considered it. I mean, if you're only looking at one ethnic group, like for me, for example, if I'm looking just at the Pennsylvania Dutch, I have a good handle on culturally what were they doing, how did they live. But if you're a
Mhm.
genealogist here and one day you're researching a Spanish family from the 1600s, and then the next week you're flipping to a Scotch Irish or English or whatever, you would have to understand the cultural differences between those groups of people too.
Absolutely. Um, Kind of as an example, I think about the fact that I learned about how in Spain, say 16th century Spain, there were different property laws about women had different property rights in Spain versus England at the same time. And so you're more likely to find last wills and testaments for women in Spain than you are in
Um,
England or, slightly later in what became the United States, just because there were different legal practices and cultural practices surrounding
yeah.
that.
Yeah, I wouldn't even have thought about that, but that's good. I mean, you have to know that information in order to put the puzzle pieces together or for it to make sense, right?
Yeah,
When you're
yeah.
stepping back. Well, you eventually said 13 years later you moved. So let's transition to where you currently are. According to LinkedIn, you are the Director of Genealogical Services and Programs at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. I want to start with this question because I'm sure there's lots of listeners to this that don't know what that is. What is the Historical Society of Pennsylvania? Who are
Ah,
they? What's their mission? What are they?
So we are, I think, a very underrated, massive library located in Center City, Philadelphia. We've got 22 million items in our collection, ranging from like old manuscript collections to photographs and books and all sorts of things. We're not a lending library, but we're a research library. So we, as our name suggests, try to preserve the history of Pennsylvania. But of course, that, depending on the time period, is going to cover a lot of different things. You know, we have a lot of broader mid-Atlantic stuff. And we've got historical and genealogical records for, I think it's every state east of the Mississippi. So Pennsylvania is just kind of a shorthand, but it's a little bit of everything.
22 million objects. And is there a museum aspect to it too? Like if I came to visit the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, that I could see some of this stuff? Or is it purely like, I'm going to come in and say, okay, I'm researching X. What do you have that I can look at?
It's mostly that. Occasionally we do have some exhibits, and you can book a behind the scenes tour, which I recommend. There's some really cool things in our collections. Like we have the first handwritten draft of the United States Constitution. You can get that right up in your own face.
Oh my God. Katy, I'm coming to Philadelphia, and I'm going to let you know when I'm coming, and we're going to look at that. Holy cow, I didn't realize that.
Please do. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's your job there? Okay, yeah, you are the Director of Genealogical Services and Programs, but what's your daily job like? What do you do there at the Historical Society?
Well, you can imagine, with as many historical records as we've got, a large portion of our patronage are genealogists, people interested in family history. So, part of that is giving them consultations about the ways they can improve their own genealogy research, or they're coming to me and saying, hey, I've had this brick wall in my family tree for years and I don't know how to overcome it and continue tracing the lineage. So I will do private interviews with people and help them strategize. I also oversee digitization efforts. That's kind of slower happening because that stuff's expensive, you can imagine. But, with 22 million items in the collection, we would love to put as much of that online as possible so that people remotely can look at it and not have to come in to Philly. And then probably lastly, I oversee a lot of the educational stuff. So we do monthly webinars and workshops and such that people can watch about how to do your Italian genealogy or, what have you. So kind of just managing all of that in the genealogy sphere.
I'm sure it's a busy schedule, I would imagine.
Yeah.
But I think also, and I'll definitely plug the Historical Society of Pennsylvania on when I post this episode. But I think the vast majority of people have no idea that it exists. I mean, to be honest, I didn't really know that much about it. Is there efforts underway to, with social media and everything, to kind of like get the message out that, hey, here we are, we have all these amazing things, come utilize us?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's going to be happening more and more. Next year is actually our 200th anniversary, which is a crazy thing to be able to say about an employer, I realize. Oh, this place is 200 years old. But we were founded in 1824, and so we are partnering with some other Philly organizations, and we're going to be celebrating our birthday and then the anniversary of the nation coming up in 2 years. So yeah, we're trying to really get out there.
I guess just one final question in regards to the Historical Society, because I'm just curious, is it a private organization, or is it state funded, or how do you guys survive financially?
It is a private organization. We have an endowment. We rely primarily on the generosity of donors.
You can get like a membership or something to the Historical Society that helps with that, or?
Yes, you can get a membership. And then, we have community partners and such that will give periodically as well.
Okay. All right. So let's turn to your expertise, which is genealogy. And I'm going to throw some softball questions at you first. I'm somebody that knows nothing, and I want to find out about my family history. Where do I start? What do I do?
The softball answer to that is that you want to actually start right at home and with your immediate family. Start talking to your parents if they're still with us, or your grandparents. And you can start with really basic questions. When and where were you born? Who are your siblings? When and where did you get married? And that will usually start people telling stories or bringing out photos and things, which can then lead to other more interesting aspects of your family history you might be interested in. But as we call those home sources, basically. And then, if mom's got a box of photos, I know my mom did, that I liked looking through as a kid. Yep. Yeah, I would really just start there. Eventually you can move on to getting an account at ancestry.com or familysearch.org or something where a lot of these historical documents are found. But you got to know a little bit about your most immediate, especially the living people first before you can get going.
So let's say none of my ancestors are alive. It's, whatever.
Hmm.
It's just me, and I don't have people that I can turn to for those home sources. What do you
Hmm.
recommend to those people then?
Well, if you don't have a copy of your birth certificate, assuming
Okay.
you're born in the United States, get one of those because those will usually list your parents. If you don't know who your parents were, that is kind of a whole different path. There's a lot of DNA testing out there now that can help you do that. I am not personally a genetic expert, but that is one route you can go.
Just as a side note, because I know a lot of people have probably seen the commercials for like, what is it, 23andMe and some of these other
Mhm.
home DNA tests. How has that changed the genealogy ball game?
Oh my God, enormously.
Was that already active when you were in college, or had you already graduated by the time that kind of stuff came around?
It was slowly blowing up when I was in college, but it wasn't yet what it is now. I mean, now there's I worked for a research firm before I came to HSP, and a lot of the clients that we had were people hiring us to identify their biological parents or, solve some mystery. So you can do that for adoptees, but it's changed the ball game too in the sense that it can be used for more historical questions too. Great grandpa was adopted, so maybe there are things that you can do with DNA. It's a lot of work. There's no simple questions usually or simple answers usually, but um, it's also opened up a lot of can of worms for people.
Uh,
If you go to just about any party and you mention a DNA test, I just had this at my doctor's office this last week where she's like, "Oh yeah, my mom did that DNA test for Christmas and found out her dad wasn't her dad." Like that happens all the time. So
I
be
can only,
careful.
yeah, no, right. But I would think also too, like, I mean, I watched the Henry Louis Gates show, Finding Your
Mm,
Roots on PBS. That's one of my favorite shows, and
it's
they
good.
always have that DNA aspect towards the end of the episode when they kind of like, and then they open the family tree, and all that stuff. But if are in your professional opinion, are there any should anyone hesitate or have qualms about doing one of those DNA tests?
Right now, I would say no. And I'm really caveating this because I really am not a genetic
Right.
genealogist. I know there's been a lot of controversy about potential privacy concerns and such. To my knowledge, that's safe. I've tested at multiple companies. I feel comfortable recommending it due to their terms of service. Um, I cannot say what that will look like in the future.
Oh,
It's
can I?
still young enough,
Are
there's
there
not.
people talking about what it like? Not to get into like conspiracy theories or anything like that, but in your opinion, in your professional opinion, do you see it? How do you see it possibly changing in the future?
I think there's definitely going to be legislation around it at some point.
Really?
Because, I mean, one of the uses of DNA, as you've probably seen if you are like anybody else in this day and age that loves true crime, is that one of the applications of this consumer DNA testing is to solve crimes, cold cases and such,
Yeah.
murders, rapes, etc. And there have been issues with third party sites, and uh, individual, probably unscrupulous genealogists that have not allowed for the privacy aspect of people being able to opt in or out of having their DNA used to identify criminals. So, um, this will be privacy concerns in general with our digital world. DNA will be part of that going forward. I'm positive.
We spoke about how DNA has changed the genealogy game. I would imagine that the internet has completely changed the genealogy game as well. I mean, and I know just speaking from personal experience, so I've always been interested in this stuff. And I grew up in a time period pre-internet days, and I was lucky enough that my family did save everything from
Hmm.
the old family Bible from the 1800s to photos to you name it, we have it. But those were all physical things that I had to read, research, and I couldn't just go anywhere to find those things. There were specific places that you had to go, et cetera, back in the
Right.
day, whether it was an archive or the county courthouse but now, my goodness, it seems like, and we have dedicated websites to all of this as well. So just
Hmm.
from your opinion, I mean, I guess the answer is pretty obvious, but I'm going to ask you anyway to hear your reflection on it. How has the internet changed the genealogy game? And has it made things harder in some way, or has it completely made things easier?
Oh, those are all such good questions. First, I think I would say one of the things that I've seen that the internet has changed is that it has kind of democratized genealogy and made it more accessible to people. So genealogy, unfortunately, has this history, not undeserved, of being kind of an elitist hobby.
Yeah.
And with the accessibility of records online and no longer needing to get on a plane and go to Mississippi or Spain or whatever to be able to access some of these records, it's a lot. It's something more of the average person can do, which I think is very, very important. What was your second question? That was so
has
good.
there been anything like bad, like any downsides to the internet and genealogy, or is it all positive?
No, I mean, it's not all positive. I think from a research angle, one of the downsides is that people assume that everything is online already. And so they're like, oh, I've done my whole family tree, or I have this mystery and I'll never be able to solve it because I've searched all of ancestry.com and none of the answers are there. When in reality, a majority of historical records, like at a repository like HSP, are still in paper
Not digitized.
form.
Right.
Yeah, or they've been digitized online, but they have not been transcribed or indexed, meaning that you can look at the images online, but you have to like turn the digital page. You cannot just input a name and search it. So
is there also the fear of false information out there too?
Yeah, I mean, they're historical documents. People historically have lied or been mistaken about things. So
what I run into too is like bad translations of things too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's another thing I'm always really cautious of too, especially if you're going from, like if you're Pennsylvania Dutch or German documents and somebody says, oh, here's the translated version. And the average person's going to say, oh, well, that must be the translated, that translation must be accurate. It might not be, right? I mean,
right.
Yeah.
Yep, okay. Absolutely. And kind of harking back to our paleography discussion, like, and those cultural things, sometimes a word, even if it's translated more or less correctly or directly, doesn't necessarily mean now what it did then. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. We mentioned a couple of these websites. So if I'm someone that wants to turn to the internet, and not saying you have to endorse any particular website, but I mean, are they viable places to go? And I know some of them are expensive. That turns people away too, depending on which one we're talking about. But as a genealogist, would you suggest to people, hey, go try out ancestry.com or whatever and start playing around?
Oh, absolutely. So I think a lot of people get stuck on these websites because they go first to the tree options. So one of the features that a lot of these websites have is that you can build a family tree on them and you can share that publicly. And that's fantastic. On the other hand, those trees are not vetted. They're not created by the websites or by professional genealogists. And so there can be a lot of incorrect information there. What I like to tell people is if you're trying to get into genealogy and you sign up for one of these websites, ancestry.com, Family Search, Find My Past, something like that, they are libraries of historical documents. Forget about the trees. They have census records. They have birth and death certificates. They have newspapers. They have more things than you can imagine, probably, of different kinds of records from all different places and for all people of all different backgrounds. And that's kind of what genealogy is. It's being a detective. It's looking at historical records, gathering as many of them as you possibly can, and then comparing the information one to one. And yeah, one of them might say something different. Maybe grandma lied, or grandma was mistaken, or grandma wasn't the one talking to the census taker.
Yeah, or grandma was told a lie and grandma believed it to be true and just passed it on. I mean, that happens so often in family stories. I mean, it's like game of telephone. The 4 generations ago said one thing, but by the time it gets to your generation, that story could have changed 3 different times and nobody knows what what the actual truth is anymore.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Or I'm sure maybe you've come across this with, Pennsylvania Germans, but Germany not having been united as a country until 1871, and they're previously just a bunch of different states. And so Prussia, might be listed on one census as a birthplace for someone, and then later it's Germany, and then later it might be something else. And they're all referring to the same place. But...
Right, exactly. And you have to look at a map from that time period to see exactly which place, what kingdom did they belong to? I mean, that happened, especially in Central Europe there in Germany. I mean, the borders were changing sometimes every year, depending on who was king, who was prince, who fought this war, who won that war. So no, absolutely. There was something in regards to that. Oh, the other thing I was going to ask you is, at what point should someone actually turn to hiring a professional genealogist?
So the common reasons that people do that often involve time and expertise. So it can be, especially the further back in time you go, the general principle is it's going to get harder. Those records are going to be scarcer, or they're going to be less detailed, or any number of things could happen, but it generally gets harder the further back in time you go. And some people don't have or desire to invest the time it takes to really do the research to get those answers, because at a certain point you're not going to get a record that directly states John was the son of Robert. You're going to have to use not to get into the weeds, but just a lot of circumstantial evidence to build these cases. So some people don't want to do that. The other thing is, especially if your ancestors immigrated from another country whose language you no longer speak, that might be intimidating for you to try to do research. I have a lot of German ancestors. I don't speak German. I know. I'm admitting that to you. So, in that case, I might have somebody help me out there, or if there's a record in an archive in Germany and I'm not going to hop on a plane myself, I can hire somebody over there to pull it for me and translate it for me and, explain its significance. So those are a couple reasons. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, here's a question for you. So now you're a professional genealogist. What is one mystery that you were trying to solve for somebody or some situation that you didn't think you were going to get it, and then you got it?
Do
you have a story that you're really like looking back on it, you're like, that's a proud moment of mine that I connected these two dots that we didn't think we'd be able to connect?
Yeah, so this was actually a team effort at my previous place of employment, but we had this client who came to us whose however many times grandfather had immigrated to Augusta, Georgia, of all places, from Switzerland. And he wanted to know where in Switzerland, this was late 19th century, and he wanted to know where in Switzerland this guy had come from. And by the way, he had settled in Augusta, but he had also lived, I think, in New Orleans and somewhere in Ohio at some point. So he'd kind of come to the US and bounced around, and he was just a guy all by himself. And a lot of the usual sources that you might look to for figuring out where in Switzerland he came from, it kind of seemed like he was being intentionally evasive because there was just nothing more specific than Switzerland. And a lot of the historical records we were turning to were just not turning anything up. It was just one of those unnecessarily hard cases where there should have been an answer and there wasn't. So I worked with a teammate and our client to take a Y-DNA test among some other DNA testing and try to figure out, because this guy had a really common name too, of course. And long story short,
John Smith, something like that, right?
Jansen, I think.
Okay,
yeah. Or something similar, And so, long story short, we ended up using those DNA results and being able to connect with some matches that connected to a specific place in Switzerland. And we kind of backtracked from there and said, okay, if he's got these distant cousins in this town, in this canton in Switzerland, maybe we should search those parish records there and see if we can find it. And the answer ended up being that this guy did leave Switzerland. He had a wife and multiple children in Switzerland. He decided he was done with all that.
Yeah.
And so he was evasive. He went to the United States and tried to obscure his origins. And the parish records back home eventually declared him dead because they never heard from him again in like the 1880s. But we knew where he went. And so he had managed to get away with that secret, I guess, for 200 years or so, but we did figure it out.
What's the farthest back you've gone in doing research that you actually were making connections?
Having done a lot of Mexican genealogy, those Catholic records go back pretty far. Some of them can go back into the 1500s. I've personally gotten back into the late 1600s doing that research. Yeah.
So that's about the farthest back that you personally have been able to research for a client or for a family, into the 1500s.
Right.
But I mean, that's far. I mean, that's 500 years, it's like, you can't just like, 1500. So that's how many generations? My goodness. Okay. This is a question I've always had, and maybe you can answer it, maybe you can't. But you went to BYU, and most people know that Ancestry.com has ties to the LDS. Why are the Mormons so interested in genealogy? Like, is there a reason? I've always wondered this, but I never knew who to ask.
Sure. Um, I'll give the disclaimer up front that I was raised LDS. I am no longer a member of the church, but I do know about this, and I did go
Okay,
to a
yeah.
Mormon college, so I can answer this question. Uh, it's part of Mormon religious doctrine that, how do I put this? That everybody has to be baptized. Everyone has to receive all the different sacraments or ordinances
Hmm.
or whatever your tradition might call them, baptism, marriage, etc.
Right.
And that um, not all of those sacraments historically were performed under the correct authority, right? That's
Okay.
the fight between a lot of different Christian denominations is over authority. And so they have this practice where they believe that you should do the genealogy of your family and then by proxy do baptisms for them to make sure that
Oh,
they have
okay.
received um the correct sacraments and ordinances. Um so that you can be together with them in the next life, salvation,
Okay.
all the usual things.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So it started there, and then they just kept building these their archives, I guess, right? Is that how it just grew from there?
Yeah, it's such a central part of the religion, this sense of family togetherness here and the hereafter that yeah, they've invested millions, billions of dollars into facilitating that, not just for their own people, but globally, which I think
And
is admirable.
I never knew. I didn't. It's like, is it just something they really enjoy, or why? I had no idea what was the connection. Okay, you answered that question. Great.
Yeah,
All right, let's get philosophical.
fun.
So, I'm into genealogy, you're into genealogy, and I know a lot of Americans, friends of mine, acquaintances, that is something that a lot of Americans do take interest in. And
Hmm.
then I look at a lot of my European friends, and I have a lot of friends in Europe, and they're not into that stuff at all. So my question to you is, from a philosophical standpoint, why are Americans so interested in genealogy?
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're a nation of immigrants and we have varied backgrounds. Like you, I have European friends. I had a roommate in college who was from Ukraine, and she said that her family had lived in the same village in Ukraine for hundreds of years. So she's like, why would I bother? Especially if the records aren't going to be very descriptive. I knew who they are. I know where they're going to be. But when, you know, so many Americans are like, oh, I have a grandparent from Italy and I have a grandparent from Ireland. And I think there's just where all the Heinz 57, it's that trying to solve that and that rootlessness. That's something that I can relate to.
Okay.
Um, I was listening to the conversation you had with Patrick Dunmore in one of
Yeah.
your previous front porch discussions and about that sense of tradition and culture that a lot of people feel like they don't have. And speaking personally, that was something that drew me to genealogy because I was not close to my extended family, and I felt like this was the way to reconstruct um, a sense of place and belonging that I didn't have. Um,
Yeah, I think
and I
what some
think that can
oh,
be
yeah, go
tied
ahead. I'm sorry.
geographically. Sorry, go ahead.
No, no, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I think part of it, you're right, absolutely. I think some people go into genealogies because, well, I want to know who my great grandfather was, or I want to know. I heard we came from Italy, but I don't know for sure where.
Hmm.
Maybe we can find out. I think there is part of that, but I know from personal experience of friends of mine that they went on the genealogy journey and they got the information that they wanted. They got names, they got dates, they got towns where they immigrated from. But what it ended up doing for them was some of the things you mentioned, of course. It made them truly understand, oh, I am Italian American, and this is why I'm Italian American. And it gave
Hmm.
them this sense of, yeah, I guess, connection to a past that, I could wax eloquently about why it's important for me and why I think other people should make these connections, and you might not be able to find multiple generations, but just to have an understanding of where you come from and who you are. For the Pennsylvania Dutch, and for me personally, it's something that I really value because I think it can expand not only your own knowledge of yourself, but it expands your view of the world
Yeah,
too, and how you fit
absolutely.
in. Can you talk to that maybe a little bit?
Um, so on the micro level, I think about the fact that, for example, my grandfather lost a wife and child, both very young. And that sort of trauma has repercussions. And even though I may never have known that person, not to get too woo-woo, I guess, but there are psychological impacts that come down. They've done studies on Holocaust survivors too, and epigenetic trauma. So in individual families, I think it's relevant, and it shapes who you are and what you do. And broadly, that extends to communities. And when you can understand how your particular ancestors were participating in certain historical events, and you can then learn about those historical events, you start understanding American history better, and how as a nation we ended up where we are.
I think one of the most powerful things for a lot of people is when they finally find that, if they're lucky enough to find the person in their family tree that decided to get on that boat and make that journey across, whether it was in the 1700s or the 1920s. I think that is such a powerful piece of knowledge to know that there was somebody, my fifth great grandfather or my great grandfather or grandmother, that took a massive risk and decided, I'm leaving everything and I'm taking only what I have. And sometimes they didn't even take that, and go to a place that they didn't speak the language, they didn't know anybody. I mean, that says something about that person. And for me personally, I like to look at that aspect of it all, because I think, like you said, it shapes the generations to come, and maybe they have a stronger sense of not being afraid to try new things, or a dogged determination to succeed, or and I think that comes from this immigrant culture that we all descend from here, or the vast majority of us descend from here in the United States. And I think it's through genealogy, and correct me if I'm wrong, or at least if you think differently, but I think it's through genealogy that we can open those pages of that book and not just learn a name, and not just learn, I mean, it's that story aspect, like you said. Oh, my grandfather decided he was going to fight in the revolution on the side of the American colonies. I mean, that says something about that person, and you can hopefully take pride in that, or use that information somehow to determine a little bit of maybe who you are, or what kind of person you might truly be. When you've worked with people who you've been doing work for, have you seen transformations like that happen to the people that you're working with? Or that light bulb moment or something like that?
I mean, definitely. I can speak for myself on that, since moving to Pennsylvania. I had never been to Pennsylvania before I moved here, and I have ancestors that are here. And even just being able to go out and go to cemeteries and see their gravestones from 200 years ago is wild. And it's hard to quantify it and describe exactly what's changing. But I will say that I think that people who get into genealogy tend to be a little bit more involved in their communities too. And I would say even in politics, because again, you have these ancestors that are participating in these historical events that you're learning about in school, and they may have benefited from, or not, from the decisions that Congress made many years ago. And so it becomes more real to you, seeing the impact that laws and our local culture can have on an average person. And that, I think, that does something to a person and makes them want to be more involved in shaping their communities.
I agree. I agree with you 100%. Because then you have an understanding of, if I come from generations of people that were involved in certain things or aspects of the society, I think there must be that kind of sense of like, well, I should be doing that too, right? That's what my grandfather did. I should try and do that too. I find all of this so fascinating, and I wish more people would get involved in doing genealogy. But there's a lot of people that do. I mean, it's got to be a really, I mean, I've never seen numbers, but there's a lot of Americans that are like, as a hobby, they're into genealogy, and they, they're working on their family tree. And I know tons of people that do it. So, you exponentially it out by the population, but it's just fascinating. I think it's absolutely fascinating. And the work you're doing, I mean, you're answering people's questions. For some people, it was a question that they thought they'd never know the answer to. And how powerful is that, right? That you can gift somebody that knowledge that they've always wanted to know. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing, and the fine people at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. And like I said, I'll put it in the show notes for sure. The link for their website, so if people want to learn more. But Katy, I know it's unbelievable. We've been talking for a lot longer than I thought, and it's just flying by. But
oh my gosh,
But at the end of every episode, you've listened to the podcast, so we do 10 quick questions that have really nothing to do with what we've been talking about, but a way to get to know a little bit more about Katy. So here we go. What is your morning drink of choice?
Coffee.
How do you take your coffee?
Uh, Cream and sugar, hot, no matter the season. I don't do iced coffee.
Yeah, I don't either. I don't think iced coffee's coffee. There, I just said it. I
It's
said it,
not.
people. I
I'm
said
with you. Oh my
it.
gosh, my people.
Fan geeks unite. Question number 2. Who is a go-to musical artist or group for you?
Brandy Carlisle.
Oh, that's a great answer. Yeah,
She's
absolutely.
wonderful.
She is wonderful. All right. What movie can you watch over and over again and it doesn't get old?
Okay, this might sound kind of morbid, but Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk is
Oh,
like the most
really?
intense movie. Yeah, it gives me a lot of anxiety, so I don't know why I torture myself, but it's
It
just such a beautifully made, immersive
yeah.
film. So
Just as a side question, did you see the newest version of All Quiet on the Western Front?
no, I need to, but I've been waiting to
Because
see it in a bigger
that
screen.
that is intense. And there's a couple historical movies that I think, have you on the edge of your seat the whole time. At Dunkirk, I agree
Hmm.
with you. Absolutely. And how historically accurate uh that movie seems to be, of course. All Quiet on the Western Front, my goodness. They changed a little bit from the original story, but holy cow. Oof.
Well, thanks for the reminder. I do need to see that.
Oof.
Oh.
Sounds good. All right, question number 4. What's the last this is gonna be, oh my gosh, what's the last thing you read?
Oh, I'm one of those people that has like 4 books going at any given
No,
time.
I have
So,
so many. Okay.
what do I have? I'm looking at my library right now. I'm trying to read more fiction, so I've been
Okay.
working on the book Snow Falling on Cedars by David Gutterson.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with it. I was hoping your answer was going to be like, oh, today I was looking at 15th century Irish baptismal certificates or something.
No, I try to have a life outside of genealogy. I don't succeed very often,
But I would
but
imagine a lot of your job is reading, isn't it?
yeah, which I
Yeah.
love. I was always, like I said, a bookworm, so
Yeah. Okay. Um, laying on the no. Oh, excuse me. Favorite pizza topping? Question number 5.
Ooh. I mean, it's got to be cheese. I don't really care what else is on it, but it's got to have cheese.
Yeah.
Like lots of
Are you?
cheese.
I'm glad that you finally made the right choice to come east, where the superior pizzas are. I know
They
it's
are,
fighting
yeah, they
words.
are superior.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, I
No.
would ask you, as a transplant to Philadelphia, I mean, great food culture there. What's your favorite food that you've encountered in Philly that was new to you?
Oh, okay. There's actually a whole list of those because it's got to be cheesesteaks. That's the obvious one, but like I come from a place where people think cheesesteak is crappy like fajita meat with bell peppers on a Subway sandwich roll, and they're just terrible. And I thought I didn't like them, and so uh, it's been an education getting to eat my way around Philly cheesesteaks
Oh,
for real.
seriously, that could be a bar tour in itself. Just different
Hmm.
cheesesteaks throughout Philadelphia. Oh,
And
good
this
stuff.
isn't Philly, but I got introduced to Fastnachts, and
Oh yes. Did you and you had the actual like all right, I have to be who I am. Were they legit
the ones
homemade?
I got not in Philly were the ones in Philly were suspect.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, they
But
oh my goodness.
they were the wrong shape.
There is nothing better than great Fosnox fresh. All right, so February, that's the time you got to keep an eye out.
Yeah.
Get the real deal with a good coffee. Oh my God.
Oh,
Mm. Oh, now I'm hungry. I'm hungry for a lot of things. Cheesesteak, Fosnox. Oh my gosh.
sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. All
Philly will do
right.
that to you.
It will, won't it? Number 6, laying on the beach or going for a hike.
Oh, that's not fair.
Why not? Why
Well,
not?
I lived in the mountains of Utah for a while, so I'm partial to hiking.
Yeah.
But right now I'm a beach person. I was introduced to the Jersey Shore. That's another thing that is new to me, and
And going to
being
the
so
shore,
close.
right?
Going
Yeah,
to
like
the shore,
going to
yeah.
the shore. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'd have to say beach. Right now it's beach.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. All right, number 7. We've talked about food, but here you go. You have invited me over for dinner. What are you making?
I'm probably ordering in because I'm not a great cook.
That's
Um,
okay. That's
but I
okay.
make a mean pot of chili and cornbread.
And,
So
and that's probably like the out like what we call chili here in the East is probably quite different from the chili you grew up with, I'm sure, out west and in Texas especially. My goodness. I'll try your
well,
Texas
I'm a
chili.
heretic in Texas too because I put beans in my chili, which is apparently
Uh,
not something you do, but I
I've
do.
I've heard that, but I like beans in my chili, so I'm okay with it. I'm
There
okay.
you go.
All right, number 8. What is a dream vacation destination of yours?
Ooh. I mean, the obvious answer is I want to do a family history trip to Germany because I have so many different little German hometowns to zigzag around. But
Yeah.
I actually would love to do um like Everest Base Camp if I ever
Oh,
got in good enough shape, or some kind of crazy hike like the Inca Trail, something ridiculous like that.
it's so, man, we are like soul children here or something. I don't know, because there has always been this weird obsession of, not obsession, but fascination with the idea of someday not climbing Mount Everest, because I know I'll never be able to
Yeah,
do
no.
that. No, but to like get to, like you said, like base camp, to say like
Hmm.
I've been to the base camp of Everest, and that whole area of the world is just so crazy. Man,
Yeah.
I can't believe you said that. I was like, right away, I was like, me too.
Just go hiking in the Himalayas. That's all I want
Yeah,
to say
let's
that
let
I have done.
yeah,
It's
to
fine.
say you've done it. Right. No, right. I get you. I
Mhm.
totally get you. All right. Number 9. What is something you're afraid of?
I am massively claustrophobic.
Oh, okay.
No tight spaces for me.
Yeah. So I guess the halls of the archive are wide in Philadelphia.
Yeah, thankfully. Yeah.
Thankfully. All right.
Airplanes, I'm having some trouble with
Oh,
lately, but
okay. All right. Okay. All right. Last question. What job, other than one that you've had, would you love to have?
again, this is really off the wall, but I think I would love to go be some kind of wildlife biologist and just go like sit in a tree in Costa Rica and study some weird frog. That sounds strangely appealing to me.
Okay. That one is out there. Yeah, right. No, hey. It would be peaceful, I'm sure, more than anything else, right?
Yeah,
Sitting
I'm
in
a
the
bit of
tree
an
canopy.
introvert, so
That's all
yeah,
right. That's all
I'll
right.
interact with the frogs and not the people. It's great.
Perfect. Well, Katie, well, that's why it's easy working with dead people, right? Because you don't have to
They don't talk back
they,
usually.
they usually don't talk back. There we go. Katie, it has been an absolute pleasure having this conversation with you. I could talk to you a lot longer, and hopefully someday we'll be able to catch up face to face again. And
For
much
sure.
longer than the last time we bumped into each other. It was like just a couple minutes. So I'd really love to be able to sit down and have a meal with you. I think that'd be a wonderful, wonderful experience. But thank you so much for coming on the show. I will put the website to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania in the show notes for anybody that wants to learn more. If you're interested in genealogy, I'm sure there's a lot of great resources that Katie could recommend to us as well. So I'll let everybody know those things also. Katie, thanks so much. And I look forward to talking with you again in the near future.
Yeah, you too, Doug. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Thank you for listening to Doug's Front Porch, a conversational podcast with your host, Doug Maidenford. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. 5 stars only, please. Follow along on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just look for Doug's Front Porch. Also, please feel free to tell all of your friends about the show, and I'll see you all next time on My Front Porch.